Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen Podcast, episode 5. Today, I'll be speaking with Akira Asakhi, who left Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. This conversation is deeply personal, part diary, part reflection on the horrors that the Russia-Ukraine war brought and continues to bring every single day. We discuss the outbreak of the war in detail, as well as the transformation of Russia, and for that matter, the world. Akira shares his thoughts on the nature of evil, the role of propaganda, and the struggle for freedom. Please be aware though, this episode contains explicit content, including descriptions of war and the immense suffering it has inflicted on people, communities, and nations. We explore both the moral challenges and human rights violations of the war, alongside Akira's personal journey to leave Russia, rebuild his life in another part of the world, and reflect on a future where truth and freedom can prevail. It's truly an intense conversation, but one that I believe is necessary in a time of crisis. With that said, here is Akira Asakhi. The invasion happened on February 24th of 2022, minutes after President Putin announced it in an address to the nation. What was it like for you personally when the violence broke out?
Insane. how, how else? We're living in the 21st century. The last thing that I expected, even from authoritarian government, is to invade in our country. So it was very unnerving. I remember that maybe for a week the work just stopped and we monitored the journals, the news, the media every single day for almost 24 hours because it was so unbelievable that that could happen and this is what is happening, and it escalated very fast, and it meant a very risky decisions and extreme crisis for everyone, for Ukrainians, for Russians, for European leaders. Something very extreme and unprecedented happened, and the biggest thing was that it happened online, because this is, I believe, the first big war that is happening online, that you can see almost every minute the new news from the front lines, videos and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that definitely was something to see. I remember you had a subreddit where like videos every single minute came out. The most insane videos, you saw the rockets going into apartments, hitting the middle of the street, people all over the place in complete panic. It was, well, I can't even imagine how it is like to be there, but it looked really, really terrifying, even from a distance.
Yeah, for sure. But it also, for Ukrainians, obviously, this is the biggest crisis in the latest history and the greatest tragedy. But it also meant for Russians the end of an era. It meant the new state of existence for millions of people, because in one day we went from seemingly peaceful, at least the illusion was maintained, regime. Yes, authoritarian, yes, with some limitations of political freedoms, but still more or less free country, to the totalitarian dictatorship in one day. For many people, it was such a big shock that they decided not to even react, like a deer stands still in front of the moving truck. So it was definitely the day that marked the transformation of Russia into the totalitarian dictatorship.
People didn't expect that to happen.
You know, people is a very broad term. Define who are people, because we have very educated, highly democratic, I don't know, 1%, 2%, and they're also people, and they obviously knew that this is where we're going to. We also have people who are still living in rural areas who have only TV and the government channel which tells them that everything is fine. So Depends on the people. We have, certainly in my circle, everybody knew that could happen, because this is the long story, right? This war, the February 22, was the pinnacle, was the extreme case and the transition point. But I mean, decades led to that, starting from Chechnya, Crimea, Georgia. Everything followed the step, and many people who were in position to Putin, they tried to warn our population and the world leaders where it will go, and it eventually did. So for people who weren't as educated, or they didn't have the opportunity to think about political freedom because of their upbringing or because of their economical status, for them, it still is either a surprise or the preferred illusion of order. For many educated people, even with not so democratic views, it was apparent that the trend is towards something much darker than just authoritarian regime.
Yeah, I remember the days before February 24th. There were talks about, I believe, Russia was effectively moving their military much closer to the border and starting to do exercises, and there were reports of an upcoming invasion. But I remember quite vividly that, well, at least that's how it felt to me, that there was some belief that, this could never happen. They would never invade, something on that scale. That's not going to happen. This is just a scare tactic in order to achieve some political goal. So the shock that you described in a different way, obviously, but the shock that you described was, I think, broadly shared when it actually happened.
Yeah, but this is what speaks to the problem of our century, right? Because before that, the great leaders of the world, when the Second World War started, they meant, and they said what they meant, and they did what they promised. And here, right now, in 21st century, after some time, we come to the place where politics, they say what is convenient to say for their rating, and they do something for the image of it rather than for the substance. And this is why when you say that it was like a scare tactic, right? And there is a very wise old phrase of the Jewish nation that if somebody tells you that he will kill you, he means it, right? And you need to act accordingly. And right now, I think that we can talk in details what comes to this crisis, what comes to this war, what are the reasons. But I think that there's also the biggest issues at play, strategic and civilizational and cultural trends that we have be very worried about. Because today's leaders, they don't do something that is substantial. They don't do something that is meaningful. Rather, they do something for the rating, for being in power, for being in office. Right now, there are no leaders, apart maybe from Zelensky, who can take the responsibility of something that is deadly for their career, but is beneficial for their nation. And right now, when we face the apparent evil, which is totalitarian regimes, such as Putin's, this is the pure evil. This is the spirit of pure destruction. We can go spiritual, metaphysical, or realistic about that, but you can see that it brings only suffering, chaos, and destruction in the world. And what we could oppose to that as a civilization, economic sanctions, raising concerns. And this is the biggest problem. And when you say that, Russia moved some forces to the border and everybody thought that invasion can never happen, and it's true. Nobody would have thought that in 21st century there will be such tactics that more remind us of dark ages rather than the current age, right? It's very hard to believe that you carry your newest iPhone in your hand and you can go into the internet in a desert, thanks for Starlink and Elon Musk, and almost there with the fusion power and the commercial space flights and everything like that. And at the same time, you read in the news that some country invades another to get the territory. This is unthinkable. But just because we have the leaders who are more bureaucrats rather than actual leaders, who think in terms of creating forums and discussions rather than taking actions and taking a moral stand rather than something that will look good in the newspaper, we have that problem. Because when we see the apparent evil, and the apparent evil is powerful, right? We need to pay credit when it's due to the devil, and it's very decisive and it's very destructive. What can we oppose to that? We also have to be as decisive, as we should have as much potential as the evil could. But all we can see that we're so got used to the peace, and we elect the leaders who are much more bureaucrats than anything else. We cannot oppose to this evil, and we can see that, right? And this is, for me, it's very unsettling to remind myself that the Second World War, it was from 1941 to 1945, right? So for 4 years. Well, we are well in the third year of the war in the center of Europe that has taken already at least 500,000 of lives. And as a civilization, as the global community of people who believe in freedom of speech, of human rights, of developing our world, what did we oppose to that?
When did you came to the conclusion that the totalitarian regime in Russia is evil, to use that word? Was that before, during, or after the invasion happened?
Well, it's very surprising, and maybe this is the only positive side of this war, of the current times, that the history became so apparent. I thought that things like evil and good is just some metaphors, or maybe fairy tales, or maybe some concepts that are good for teaching only small children, or maybe this is just a religious concept, something philosophical and completely detached from real life. But after the war started, it became apparent that evil does exist in its most realistic form. And when you see all these destroyed buildings and small children torn apart with their guts on the walls of smoldering cities, well, evil does exist, and it exists just because of that, just because it is evil. There is no reason to do that, and there is nothing that can justify that, even if you try to be cynical about that. Well, the economy, the political struggle. No. If Putin remained at the power with the same regime as he had with authoritarian regime, just within its own country, every one of his team and he himself would have been much more powerful, much more rich than they are right now. So the only reason for the current events is the evil itself, the destruction, the spirit of destruction and death. And I understood that only after the war has started.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because I know that there were some restrictions in place when it came to the distribution of media and access to information. The reason why I'm asking when you came to that conclusion is because I know for a lot of people within Russia, it was very hard to see what was happening in Ukraine. But apparently it reached you. How did it reach you? How did you manage to find out what was really happening instead of the meta narrative that was being shared at that point?
Well, it's 21st century. I mean, in the current times, the responsibility for navigating in the world lies on the shoulders of an individual. And it doesn't take a lot of education. This is not something that is reserved only to elites. You need to think, and you need to look with your own eyes. And in Russia, despite the propaganda and everything, and by the way, this is such a huge win for the civilization that Russian government and Russian propaganda they are so distasteful, useless, clumsy, and just disgusting, illogical, that we can actually oppose them easily with just telling the truth. Right? Because if we go back to the Nazi propaganda with Hitler regime, it was somewhat more sophisticated than current Russian propaganda. At least they cared about logic, at least they tried to put in some idea in front of their atrocities. They didn't justify them, but at least they had
tried
some...
to make it attractive.
Well, at least there was some logic underneath it, right? There was some purpose. And here with Russian propaganda, and I read it every single day, just in order to be aware what we oppose. And every single day is different. Every single day is a different story. So they say the different perspective today, opposite, like completely 180 degrees opposite from what they said yesterday. So they don't care about the logic or anything at all. So by that point, even the people who do not have a lot of income, or they're not as educated as elites, they still can buy the cheapest phone. They still can have a free access to the internet. It doesn't cost much in Russia. They still can have to the messengers. They still can have access to the information. So this is just the internal desire to know the truth or to remain an illusion. And in Russia, it's so apparent every single day, because if you go on the main government media, and right now there are no independent media in Russia. There's none, zero. But even if you go there, if you listen for some programs there, for some news, and then you go outside and look with your own eyes what is happening outside, you would understand, even without education, even without master's or even bachelor's degree, you'll understand that the discrepancy between what you're being told to and what is actually happening on the street is so drastic that it just cannot be true. So for me, it was a really long time. I've been considering leaving Russia for maybe last 10 years, because we're different from animals, because we think in terms of trend. We can build models of the future. We don't just react, well, we shouldn't at least, react to the things that we see. We think in the future, we see the trends, we're trying to figure out where it leads to. And Russia, it tried to remain a decent country on the outside, but it had a trend falling into the dark totalitarian regime for years, for decades. Especially when you try to see, and especially when you try to do something in the world, like business, or even if you are in a management position in a company, or even if you are an employee, but you're still looking forward to making the product better, or serving the customer better, or just giving your best at work, you were able to see that at every step of every meaningful decision, especially in the government, there are such incompetent, disgusting, and morally fallen people that you cannot do anything. So if you go in Europe, if you go in USA, in Western countries, right, your effort to create something is multiplied by the quality of infrastructure. It is multiplied by the common effort to make things better. In Russia, every single step is divided by 10, by hundreds, because of insane laws, because of idiots in higher places. I mean, we had just one case to make an example of that. Imagine that we can have a lumber industry, right? The whole industry that produces lumber for export. This is a huge taxpayer, not as huge as gas and oil, obviously, but still is the third best industry in Russia. Well, because it's relatively easy. And the main person who decided the whole policy of the whole industry for one of the states in Russia he was previous policeman. I don't have anything about police officers, right, in the Western countries, but can you imagine that person didn't have even 1 hour of lectures on lumber industry, but he still was put as a main government officer for the whole state regarding that industry. And you can only imagine what insane decisions were given from that agency to our businessmen and entrepreneurs.
Why? Why do you think? Why do you think that is?
Well, the corruption. Obviously, this is the main thing, and you see, this is the biggest issue. This comes back to your question: for how long was it apparent that this regime is evil?
Mm-hmm.
And for us to understand that the whole system is based on corruption. So how it worked after the USSR has fallen, we were presented by the current president, and he spent last 30 years using the money from oil and gas in order to corrupt every level of government, of authority, of power. The army, the police, the prosecution, the court, every single level is built on corruption. Therefore, the system works on negative selection. It only keeps the people who are the most loyal and also thieves. If you're a decent person and if you just want to serve your nation and you don't want to take money, you will not survive in the system.
Yeah, so you have to follow the same idea. I'm not sure if it's an ideology or something else, but you have to at least support that corrupt system in order to stay in it. And pretty much everything that you can do to oppose it, it takes away all your chance to be successful.
Well, and you can see that this is how this is evil. And, we have so many jokes. And I'm really happy to see that Ukrainians, despite the horrible tragedy that is happening with their nation, they still can kind of laugh about it, right? And sometimes humor can save your psyche from those tragedies. And they given the name of Mordor, referencing the Lord of the Ring movie, and they say that Russia right now is a murderer, and Russian troops in Ukraine are orcs. And that metaphor works extremely well. It works on so many levels because the whole system in Russia right now, it's like the state of evil. Everything turned from the head upside down. So when in normal society, the most competent people should go on the high of hierarchy, right? Because they're competent, they're professional,
Yes.
noble. In Russia, the most incompetent, the most corrupt, the most morally demised people go on the high of hierarchy. And right now you can see that so clearly, and this is insane because my first degree is a law degree, right? I have a master's in law. And right now, I so regret that I don't have the opportunity to speak for my professors in my university because they were teaching me the theory of the human rights, the natural human rights, that the human rights, is the main thing that governs human civilization, right? But what they did, they use the law, the Russian government uses the law in order to subjugate human rights. And for me, it was an insane case. I don't know if you know about that. After the war started and they first wasted the regular forces, around 200,000 of regular army, and they weren't able to achieve anything. But then they released criminals from prisons.
Yeah, I read that.
People by tens of thousands. Just think about that. They took the criminals, people who murdered multiple people, 8 people, raped children. They released them from the prison based on nothing. There is no law, there is no right, there is no reason to do that. They released these people. Not only they released them, they gave them weapons. They sent them to kill innocent people in a different country. And when they returned, the one that survived, they hailed them as heroes on the national television, giving them money and governmental accolades. And now they putting them on the base that they went to the war, those murderers, they put them in the government as elites, and they allow them to teach children in schools. Can you imagine more perverted reality than that? And I'm reading about that every single day. It's just one example, right? But we have every single day those things that Orwell in his seminal novel wouldn't have even thought of thinking about. There is no more perverted way to arrange reality like right now it is in Russia.
I remember reading about it, that I believe it was a year after the invasion started, that they were going to prisoner camps to release them, basically with the choice, you either fight and you lose your sentence, or you stay here for life. So, yeah, with that choice in mind, a lot of people, the people that you mentioned, were sent to the front. Yeah.
At the same
I can't
time,
even. It's insane. I can't even imagine the amount of horror that caused on so many different fronts, both locally within Russia itself, as what they did in Ukraine. As it's an unbelievable thing to think about.
you cannot even comprehend that, and this is why I'm telling that this metaphor of murder works perfectly, because this is the opposite. This is the opposite world where children. And this is real cases, you can read about them, and it happens every single day. Right now there are more than 10,000 of political prisoners in Russia. So while they're releasing criminals by tens of thousands to kill innocent people in different country and hiring mercenaries from other country, at the same time they're sending to prison children, 15 years old teenagers, for what crime? For the crime that they went on the sole event, they went by themselves, stand on the street and hold it. They didn't write on the piece of paper, kill Putin or change the regime. No, nothing like that. Those children, brave enough, they went and write on their small papers, we want peace. Please don't kill people. For that, they went to prison up to 20 years on charges of terrorism.
Yeah.
So this is what we're up against.
It's I saw videos of that as well. It even happened to people that were just holding a blank paper. Everybody who was there, I believe it was on the Red Square. Everybody who was there that held any form of paper was standing close to well, I'm not sure if you could call it protesters, but to the people that were gathering there. They were just taken by 4, 5, 6 policemen per person, shoved into a van and driven off. It was bizarre to see. Absolutely bizarre to see.
Yeah, and this is appalling. This is why I'm telling you that this is an opposite world, right? This is where police officers, the people who need to preserve the justice, the honor, the goodness in society, they are employed, they're being trimmed, and they're being cultivated to be the worst mindless beings who will beat up to death children on streets for their desire to not kill other people. More than that, there are cases that teenagers were taken to the police precinct and raped in the police precinct by police officers for reading some anti-war poetry on the street, to the point that they needed to be sent to the medicine facility because they were on the verge of death. And when you see and when you read about those news, and I'm talking about very few cases, it happens every single day for past several years. And when you know that reality, and then you read that the political leaders still of the Western countries still think that we need to go into the negotiation with Putin and maybe he will listen to our arguments. Really?
Yeah, nothing shows to that fact.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that before you left, you were already thinking for 10 years about leaving Russia.
Yeah.
Why?
It goes to the biggest question, what is the meaning of life? And I believe that, and I'm an atheist, I don't have any religious beliefs, but at the same time, I believe in people. I think that our life is an adventure, and we should be grateful for being alive, despite of the suffering that's going on around. And our aim is to create a beautiful world together, a peaceful one, the world of knowledge, of reason, of beauty, of goodness, of truth. And when you have that desire, when you align yourself with the spirit of good, beauty, and truth, you try to implement that in the world. And in Russia, when you try to do something good, it's being demolished. It's being pushed back. In other countries, yes, there is no ideal country. Every country has its own problems, and it's okay. But there are countries where your efforts to create something beautiful and good is multiplied and cheered upon. And Russia, for a long time, is the place that cultivates only the trend to destruction and to suffering. Therefore, when you go out and try to do something good, you try to do something constructive, you're trying to create something, it's being demolished, and the worst case, you can go to jail for that, for just trying to be a good person or a good citizen. If you want to be, for example, if you want to define the future of your country, if you want to not even get power, right? For I don't care about the power or the big money. I only care about what the positive impact I'm doing in our world, big or small. And if you want to just do that, if you want to just be a good citizen and to contribute to flourishment of your nation, and you try to go into politics, you will be killed as Nemtsov or Navalny. Because there are terrorists, because there is a crime gang that took in all the power and they won't let you in. You cannot do that. If you want to build something, you need to jump so many ropes. And even, I mean, simple example, as a company, we wanted to build a small bridge. Well, because we exported some goods, we needed a better logistic, and it just made sense that there were a river and we wanted to build a small bridge that will be beneficial for us as a company, but also would be beneficial to several small villages with old people who will get access to cities, who will get access to the better stores, to the better facilities. So everybody win, right? And we wanted to build it by ourselves, using our own money, no credits, no government involvement, nothing. We didn't do that. Do you know why? Because every single paper that needed to be issued for that, there was a guy who demanded us to pay them to do that. And you can see that, especially after the war, because when the war started, there was a huge problem, and there is the city that is called Orsk in Russia. And it was flooded because the dam, there were so much money stolen from the government budget to build the dam. So they built it, but they built it not up to the standards. So it broke within a couple of years and flooded the whole city. Thousands of people lost their homes. So the neighboring city that saw that, and the people who live in Russia, they know everything about the government, right? And they saw that, and they also had a dam and a river, and they said, well, we don't want that. Let's collect the money and build the dam ourselves so we will not be flooded. They did that. Do you know what the result of that was? The result was that the government came and demanded to demolish that dam because it was constructed without their permission.
Right.
And this is how it is on every single step, from the smallest thing to the biggest project that you can do. It's being demolished and destructed, because for hundreds of years, the main purpose of Russian government, of USSR government, what name you, right, of this territory, was to destroy any will to activism, to destroy the freedom, independent spirit of people, to shut down the creative spirit of people so that they could be slaves and could only rely on the small elite that would decide everything for them. This is why, and I'm not that kind of person. I don't need a master, right? I would like to govern my own life. And this is why I've thought about leaving it. I didn't do that sooner because I didn't have the capacity to do so. It's not that easy to leave Russia and go to the world with Russian passport, especially right now. But because I saw the trend, after Chechnya, after Georgia, after Crimea, which was and I believe that this was the biggest mistake of the West to let it happen, and this is why we have the war right now. Because they let that happen. And after that, you can only see that independent media are being shut down one by one. People go to jail for opposing government, even in the slightest form, in the easiest form. You cannot tell the truth. The economy shutting down. It's only reliant on the oil and gas. Everything else is being destroyed because the most corrupt and unprofessional people are at the highest of hierarchy, and they make decisions that benefit only their own financial state, not the state of the nation or entrepreneurship or the creative people. The creative people are being persecuted for being freedom, independent, and creative. It's insanely hard to do anything constructive in this place. So when you have a country that is run by criminals who destroy everything that is constructive and good and employ only the worst of the society, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to kind of foresee where it goes.
And you saw it 10 years ago. And that was, I believe, 2014. So that was the invasion of Crimea. That's when the idea first came to you to actually leave the country. You said you didn't have the means by then. Clearly you had them after the invasion. So how did that decision happen to finally make the move?
So it's embarrassing to say that it came to me only after Crimea, because it was apparent even before that, but we were raised and we were influenced, our generation and previous generations were raised, that you can do anything that you want but politics. Because the politics is only for the elites. If you go there, you will be killed. And there's no way for you to do that. You can go into what have you, entertainment, arts, science, entrepreneurship, do whatever you want. And this was the consensus. This was the deal that the nation doesn't pick into the corruption of the political elites and don't take any participation, but these political elites maintain the peace and stability and give the opportunity for economical freedom. That was the consensus. And we were raised in that atmosphere and environment that not only it's dangerous to go into politics, but also it's kind of not very good, because if you go into politics, it's not because, and it was perceived in our generation that if you go into politics, you're not doing that from the bottom of your heart, but you do that for the corruption itself, which was in most cases true. So this is why we were raised like that we cannot take part in that because this is only the fate of the chosen ones, but also that it's dangerous and there is no reason for that. And it's kind of bad reputation. So I didn't look into that earlier before that, but as we can see, if you ignore the politics, this is where it comes to. And in 2014, the Crimea was a wake-up call for me because I was a lawyer. I already had my master's diploma and I understood the concepts of international law and of these big systems, because for you to understand the repercussions of such an action, you have to understand how the law works, how the society works. So you have to think about very high-level abstractions to figure out the trend, where it's going. But for me, it was like a wake-up call. It means that this country doesn't have human rights at all. It doesn't have law. It has only the will of force. It has only the rule of force. And this is why I decided to look into the migration, because even by that point, there was nothing that could have been done from within the country, because by that point, It's been almost 20 years that the West traded and gave billions of dollars yearly in oil and gas money to this regime. Even after Chechnya, even after Georgia, even after Crimea, so that those criminal gangs that we call right now Russian government, they took all the power. So right now they have around 2 million armed criminals that are called police officers or army officers that have strategic aviation, nuclear bombs and everything. So me personally, as a human being with no connections or no army by myself, I cannot influence that government. And well, I can go and do some heroic feat and die in vain, basically. How, for example, Navalny did, and it was a heroic death. It was a heroic deed, and he's the Russian saint. But the result. So this is why my decision was to maybe I can relocate to the place where my talents can be multiplied and I can give the world a little bit more rather than dying in this bloody place with no hope or actual impact for the world. So I thought like that, yeah, and then I accumulated some small money that I could spend on my next education and leave the country. But this time it wasn't as if I left the country. It was like I ran from the concentration camp, because effectively right now Russia is a concentration camp. Mm-hmm. Every second you can be taken from the street and murdered by police officers, and nothing would happen. So the only logical reason for me was to leave, not only because I was worried about my safety, but first and foremost because I didn't want to contribute to this insanity. Mm-hmm. And I understood that if I live here, even if I don't do anything that is related to the war, even I don't produce bullets, for example, I make coffee, but I understand that I pay taxes to the people who use every cent of my taxes in order to create bombs to kill innocent people. And I just couldn't sleep with that. I just couldn't tolerate that. I didn't want so. I sold a little property that I had there. I lost 80% of my small worth and relocated just because I don't want to take part in that madness. Right now there is no way to change the regime from within. The only way to change the regime right now is just help Ukraine win.
What does that mean, help Ukraine win?
It means that Western countries, they either need to get involved in the war and destroy the Russian forces on Ukrainian territory and help it defend its sovereignty, or it means at least supplying enough weapons to Ukraine army that it can preserve its own territory.
I find this a highly terrifying idea, to be honest. And I hear it. Well, it's something that you hear quite often here in the West. Help Ukraine win. And while I certainly understand that sentiment, I have a very big question mark with the word win. Because what does that mean? Does it automatically mean that Russia has to lose? And if Russia loses, what does the effect of that? What does that constitute for Russia? And the next question will be, will Russia allow itself to use or to lose? And what will it do to prevent that? You know, all those questions imply escalations.
Sure.
So once again, I certainly understand the sentiment. We should help, well, in this case, the good win versus the evil. But the evil won't just let that happen. That's pretty much where I see a huge, terrifying question mark.
I don't think that this is a choice. I think that this is an illusion. And I do understand why people keep hanging on that illusion. If you have a murderer, if you have a terrorist, And if terrorist demands something in exchange for your relative safety, and you give it to him, are you really telling me that he won't take anything else? If you live in a house, in an apartment building, and there is some murderous maniac, and he demands that you give him your neighbors to murder, so you do, and he says, well, you either I murder them or you, then you give him your neighbors. Are you telling me he won't ask for more people, or he won't get to you? Really? I think this is an illusion. And right now we have the biggest issues and concerns. We have the fight between good and evil. And that was a huge mistake of the West. If after the invasion, NATO gave Putin 1 week for retrieving his forces, or his whole army will be destroyed by the NATO forces on the Ukrainian territory. That's it. That would have been a solution. If you have an aggression against you, you need to stand with everything you have. Because right now, following your logic, if Putin says, and I understand where you hinted, if Putin says that, give me Ukraine, or I will nuke the European cities, and you say, well, yeah, okay, let's give him Ukraine. You give him Ukraine.
Where does it stop?
Are you telling me that he won't demand Finland next? Where does it end? It doesn't end. And right now we're not having some local small conflict between ex-USSR republics. No. We're having right now the civilizational conflict between democracies that are founded on the human rights, on freedom of speech, on law, against dark ages that tries to drag our civilization back where everything were decided by the force. And if we don't fight back with everything we have today, tomorrow, we won't have anything to fight for. And you can see that, I don't know, because, and maybe the problem of the Western countries is that they don't listen to the Russian official television. For the past several years, every single day on the official government channel, politics demanding to nuke Europe, USA, and Britain. Every single day they scream that we need to destroy the civilization, that we need to destroy the cities, that we will take first Ukraine, then Kazakhstan, then Finland, that we need to nuke London, Helsinki, Washington. Listen to them. They mean it. And right now, I kind of understand, well, that NATO doesn't want to be involved because it's basically useless. For me, it's the same as if you declare that your purpose is to preserve humanity and defend what's good and right, and then you don't help a person who's being murdered on your front yard just because this is your front yard, not the house. Because you promised that you will defend everything in the house, but that if somebody is murdered in your front yard, well, this is not the house yet, so why would we be involved? And right now, Russian drones and rockets flying in the airspace of NATO countries, and they don't do anything. Do you really think he will stop? Do you really think that after killing more than 500,000 people, he will just
somehow
say,
will change heart?
That's enough?
I don't know. I obviously I don't have the answer to this, and either way, to me, sounds like hell. I think your logic makes sense. So the logic of, if this ends, then will it be enough, and won't he go further? I completely get that. But to me, the alternative is that we start World War III. That is the alternative. In your not your suggestion, but in what you meant, in what you said, the example that NATO gives Russia 5 days to retreat or else, if that deadline is not being met, then you got World War III. We start engage, and we as in the West starts engaging by actively providing forces to the Ukrainian land and fighting Russian forces off. We start World War III.
So tell me So tell me, do you want to live in a Third Reich under the Hitler, or do you want to start a war for freedom? The same choice is here. It's either today, and I mean for the West, it's such a huge oversight, because for you, especially in European countries that are close to the action, for you the choice is like that. Either today you provide all that is needed for Ukrainian to punish this maniac and to deal with that while they're agreeing to sacrifice their own blood and children, or tomorrow your children will go to that. There is no other way. I completely understand your aspiration to not getting involved in the bloody mess and chaos, and I do understand that. I do treasure the peace that we have achieved. I do wish for us to live in the peace and creative trading and open borders and global village where everyone works for the best of the humanity. I really do. But here we don't have a choice, and the choice that you're trying to give me, it's not a choice, it's an illusion.
Yeah. No, my standpoint is not to... It's not for me, either you live in the Third Reich or you start a war. My primary concern is that starting a war pretty much means you have nuclear capable countries that are fire ready and ready to go, which means that if that starts, it's not gonna, well, that's how I see it at least right now, it's not gonna be World War II where there's a global conflict, but after that the world can recover in some shape or form. In this case, it will be the end of days.
Do not overestimate Russia. I do understand that for foreigners, Russia looks like a very terrifying force and formidable one. Do not overestimate them. They're just
Why?
Couple of gangs. Because everything is stolen, because everything is corrupted, everything is dissolving by itself. And I'm not telling you invade Russia in order to change the regime. That would start a nuclear war. But even right now, as you can see, the Ukrainian forces are invading as we speak Russian territory. They have taken
since a few weeks.
Last 3 weeks, they have taken more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory. Do you see nuclear weapons? Do you see Russia nuking Ukraine? Because they're not insane. They're clinically insane, but not to the point of losing their own lives. They will try to use nuclear weapons if you invade Russia and try to change the regime. This is guaranteed. But defending Ukraine just means saving the world. And Putin knows that the minute he uses the nuclear weapon, his life will be ended. And he doesn't want to do that. He's a maniac, but he treasures his own life. This is why it is important. And you see that many other regimes looking at that, looking at the impotence of the West civilization, and they thinking about starting the next war. China looking at Taiwan, China looking at the USA right now, they cannot do anything about Ukraine. Do you not think that China will take Taiwan? Or do you think that Turkey will not try to reestablish Turkish empire? Or do you think that North Korea are not inspired by the weakness of the Western civilization not to start a war with Japan or the South Korea? There are much bigger things at stakes than economical stability or the peace right now, right away. And I mean, especially for the West civilization, it's not, you don't have to go and die yourself. Right now, Ukraine does for everyone. Ukraine does that. The only thing that it asks is just enough weapons to deal with that. And that's it. If you allow, let's just play out, right? I understand that my scenario and my proposition is awful. It sounds scary. It sounds destructive. I totally agree with that. I myself am very scared about that scenario. I'm not at the least expecting that and want that. No. But let's play out the different scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You say, yeah, well, okay, right now Putin, for stopping the war, demands that it will take the half of Ukraine territory. It does. Okay. What's next? Just tell me, are you really thinking that this is it? That he will say, yeah, well, this is it. This is what we wanted. 4 new areas of Ukraine, and this is it.
Well, if we believe history, then I think the answer is no, because this trick has already been pulled a couple of times.
Of course. And then he invades one more time or a different country and says, if you don't give me that, I will nuke you. My question, where does it stop? Right now, you can just supply weapons and support Ukraine for them to sacrifice their people, as horrible as it sounds for them. But even from the cynical standpoint, if you don't want to take into account like emotional argument, right? But from a cynical standpoint, would you rather sacrifice some economical growth and weapons right now, or your own lives and your own children tomorrow? This is the biggest issue rather than just local conflict. This is the issue of battling good versus evil. This is battling two civilizational paradigm. It's either democracy, as flawed as it might be right now, human rights, freedom, free markets, civilization, innovation, science, truth, beauty, development, that, or concentration camps. Choose. And the same thing was, and if you remember, the Caribbean crisis was won when they understood and that USA declared the concept of mutual annihilation. So if USSR launches nuclear missiles, then USA also launches nuclear missiles. And there are leaders who understood the risks of that strategy, but they did that because they understood that they would rather risk the war, but they would want to live in a free world rather than living in concentration. And right now we have that at our gates. And I mean, look at that. And this is, you don't have another choice. Look at Russia and everything what I told you about, the children in the prison, the murder, the criminals, right, on the war, the amount of destruction and death. On every single corner, the dirt, the corruption, that trend to the dark ages. Do you want to live in that? Or do you want to live in the civilization that was created by your fathers and grandfathers? Civilization of freedom, science, technology, innovation, human rights. Because dark ages, right now, fighting the Ukraine for them to return to the dark ages. Do you not really think that this disease will spread? Because there is no other reason for that to spread. Russia would have been in much more favorable condition without any wars rather than with them. Russia has everything, and this is so insane. That move is so insane because Russia has everything. Oil, gas, diamonds, metals, forests, seas, territory, people. Everything that you can think about, Russia has. And despite that, they started that horror. So there is absolutely no logical reason for this tragedy rather than the internal corruption and the evil of the elites. And we need to choose whether we want to live in that or in that. And I mean, don't even, okay, I totally get your argument, obviously, but just because politics, even we don't speak, let's not speak even about weapons, let's not speak about the actual involvement, active involvement in the war itself, right? Let's speak about the substance against the form. Right now, the leaders, the bureaucrats that flourished, so our fathers and grandfathers, they built the new civilization after the Second World War on the foundation of freedom, spirit, innovation, human rights, cooperation. They built and flourished on those foundations, and then those good times produced weak men, the bureaucrats, professional bureaucrats, these leaders who are much more concerned about their public image rather than impact they're doing on their own nation. And right now, when the obvious corruption and evil and dictatorship fights and tries to subjugate a free country because it cannot stand to see Slavic country to be free and being integrated in a civilization. It cannot let it happen because everything should suffer. They see that. And even if they don't want to participate in the war itself, I absolutely get that. They continue to buy and to pay money. They continue to send the money for gas and oil every single day by millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the decision not to buy the oil and gas from Russia would increase prices in the country, would drive up inflation, would lower the quality of life of the nation, and would effectively destroy their careers. So for them to remain at power, they decide to remain in illusion of normality, to hide from the reality of totalitarian regime, of corruption, destroying the sole foundation of the civilization. They decide to ignore that and not to make drastic decisions that will kill their career, but at the expense of the future of the freedom of their nation.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't want to fight, and I absolutely get that, even if you don't want to be involved as a European country, if you don't want to be involved in the war directly, and I absolutely get that, why are you still insisting on paying those criminals who use every single cent to kill innocent people, children and all, daily send them millions of dollars, effectively supporting the war?
Yeah, that I believe it ended now. That ended already a while back, but that was a huge discussion point over here in the Netherlands and West Europe.
Still by now, by millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every single day. And I mean, we are speaking about that Russian people, they failed to govern their country, and they brought about this evil that right now that threatens to destroy the civilization itself. And this is partially true. Obviously, the Russian people are responsible for that also. But let's say about European countries that keep sending millions of dollars. I paid to this regime, to those terrorists, I paid in my lifetime less than $1 million in taxes. How much money did European countries and West itself send in oil and gas prices to the Putin regime, well known that he is a tyrannic leader who subjugates people and kills his political opponents and invades our countries? Chechnya, Georgia, like Chechnya 1991, Georgia 208, Crimea 214. So it's been almost 30 years them sponsoring that. I mean, let's share responsibility. And the soul, and I mean, the soul, the only thing that you need to do to crush this regime, stop buying any oil and gas tomorrow. Any. This regime is built on using oil and gas money to corrupt every single stage of society and of the power hierarchy. He doesn't have that. It will crumble in terms of months.
I'm gonna make a small jump here. How did your last day in Russia look?
Terrifying, hasty, because there is nothing more like the fear of uncertainty, because it drives you it drives you insane, because nothing bad happens per se, and life on streets looks the same, but you understand that something incredibly bad and extreme happened to the sole foundation of your existence, and the worst thing that can happen to a human being being subjugated or being killed can happen to you every single second, and you are in the power of the corrupted and morally fallen, disgusting people, and you cannot do anything about that. This is the feeling of all-eating liquid fear, whereas you're still being in a relatively seemingly safe environment. So it drives you insane. This is why a lot of people went in internal immigration, meaning that they try to ignore what happens, not to read any news, not to speak about that. And you see right now, and especially in the first few months of the war, you saw the people that started to become aggressive if you even bring up that conversation.
What was the day that you left?
I believe that I left in June.
Of 22?
June 2022. Yeah, because I needed to... Well, first, it's not an easy decision to forsake everything that you had for 30 years and sacrifice everything that you gained and to live nowhere. So it took some while to wrestle because everything seemed fine. Nobody was affected. I was not in any immediate threat per se, but at the same time, you do understand that any second you can be wasted in the worst possible form, in the sake of the worst possible reason. And therefore, it took some time to wrestle with morality and the current state, and then some time to arrange anything, like documents and everything. So yeah, it took a couple months.
And how did you make... I believe you ended up in Indonesia and you're living now in Bali. Was that the first decision that you made, or how did that location came about?
Well, because right now, Russians, just by passport, are perceived being international terrorists, which is... Well, I get it. And right now, the Indonesia, or, well, basically any Asian countries, are the only safe countries where you don't get discriminated just because of your passport, where you can stay for a while, and most importantly, where you can get a visa and open a bank account. Because right now, with my Russian passport, I wouldn't even dream about opening a bank account in European countries.
Yeah, so you are able to settle for a couple of years at least.
Well, I hope so, if nothing changes, yeah. Because I would rather start with scratch rather than complying and helping the regime to destroy the world.
Yeah. How have you adjusted to life in Bali? Because like you said, you are pretty much starting from zero, so that must have been quite a challenge.
Well, it depends. Obviously, this is not an easy, and any immigration, especially emergency immigration, when you don't plan everything out perfectly, is a very complicated task. I mean, but the notion that you're doing that for the best possible reason, for you to be free and for you not to be not to help with the war, not to contribute to the war, and trying to be the part of the free world, defending the morality and defending the human rights, that helps. Obviously, it's challenging because you're getting thrown from your culture, thrown out from your usual life. You have to start from zero with loss of status, loss of everything that you had. You're thrown back at least 5 or maybe 10 years in your life, and by the worst reason. And it's challenging not only on operational level, but it's surprisingly challenging on emotional level. I never would have thought of that I would have any problem with emotional control and kind of depression avoidance, but in that case it hit pretty hard, especially the fact that you didn't relocate because you wanted to, but you relocate because you had to. This is a different way. But when you do that for the right reason, I mean, the key here is not the country or the culture, I mean, the freedom and the contribution to the world. At least for me, and I believe for many people, honestly, the most important thing would be what your life contributes to in the world in the end, right? And if you're you're comfortable, and I could have still live in comfortably life in Russia. I did not think about that, but I just couldn't compromise on my moral grounds. I just couldn't live with that. Therefore, for me, it's complicated on the level of status and earning enough money and keeping the lifestyle and everything else, but it's not compatible to the tragedy of Ukrainians. And also, when you do that for the right reason, it gives you more energy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the conversation that we have right now, this is a great example. I would not trade any income for the ability to speak what I think. Because in Russia, the current conversation in Russia would account for prison time of around 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's insane. It's quite a story you're telling, Akira. You're actually the first person I'm speaking with since 22 that is from either Ukraine or Russia that is sharing his first person perspective on what is happening. I must say it's there's few words I can find in order to express how deep and dark and sad it is what is happening. And it requires a lot of thought in order to work out what the proper way forward is. At least that's how I feel about it. What I really appreciate, though, and even though we are, for as far as I'm concerned, we're not at the end of the conversation yet, but what I really appreciate, and I want to bring it out to you as largely as I can make it, is that you are willing and able and passionate, I would even say, about telling your story, which, well, must not be the most easy thing to do. Let's just say it that way.
Well, thank you for your kind words, but I mean, telling the truth is the easiest and the most pleasurable thing to do. And I get it, especially in terms of conversations, because we have a lot of Russian people here in Indonesia, like small community, and everyone is in a shock. It's not compatible with the Ukraine's shock, but at least Ukraine, it can fight back. As tragically as it can be for us, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I understand that for all other people, it's also a kind of a shock, and everyone is just standing still and not being able to come to senses. But for me, and this was the time, if we want, and there's no, it is tragic, obviously, and it is hard, and it's impossible to comprehend in this whole essence what is happening right now. But there is no reason for us to even think or reflect about it, right? It happened, and right now we need to be optimistic, and we need to find the energy in us to defend the best of humanity that we have. This is it. This is just our challenge. I also have never thought that I would even speak about those conversations and about those things, because in the school we have to read the diaries of the political immigrants from USSR, and when you read this in school, you think, well, this was a very bad world to live in, and you couldn't even comprehend how the person was abolished from his own country for just some slight critics of the government, and then had to be lost in the foreign nation without any hope of the homeland. It's very strange thing to even comprehend. But right now I'm in that place, right? This is for me insane in terms of events, but there is no value for us to comprehend about the tragedy or sadness of that. We need to think forward, right? This is our generation, this is our world, we live in it, and now we need to walk towards the light. We need to walk towards the better future, and we need, yes, we have, this is the greatest challenge of the civilization for the last decades, or maybe for our generation. And I mean, talk about millennials surviving the financial crisis, COVID, and now the possible Third World War. I mean, it will be an interesting life to talk about with your grandchildren. Right now we need to feel only anger and rage towards the evil. And if anything, if there is anything positive that we can get from the current events, it's that evil exists. That such things as good and evil, such things as truth and lies, such things as purity and corruption, these are not some religious beliefs that we outgrown as civilization. It doesn't have to do anything with spirituality, with Christianity, or with fairy tales. No, this is actual concepts. These are actual trends and spirits that govern our civilizations. And we stopped. This is a huge problem, that we stopped to communicate and to even think about it. You cannot have a conversation with people about morality anymore because, well, everyone is as good as they are, right? Because, well, love yourself as you are, and because individual freedom and such and such, and the conversation about the personal responsibility becomes outdated and seems very lame in layman's term. And this is not the case. It turns out that those are the foundations that our civilization is built upon. It turns out that we need to talk with children about good and evil. It turns out that we as adults, it's our responsibility in every single step that we make in this world to cultivate in ourselves the spirit of truth, goodness, and light. And we don't have to have a prolonged discussion what it is. Everyone feels if they do something good or bad. I think this is the eternal feeling. And this is what taught us. Look at Russia. The Russian nation, the Russians, they were bombarded by propaganda, cultivating the worst in human nature. The cynicism, the detachment from their own lives, the lack of empathy for humankind, the complex of imperialism, the elitism of government, the political impotence of nation. They were cultivated for decades, and now you see where it leads. We undoubtedly come, and I mean, I am so amused to see where this world came to, that we came to human rights, that we came to emancipation, that we came to the rights of LGBTQ community, that we become more acceptant, that we became more free, that we declared the value of individual human life, the freedom of speech. But in that transition to current lives, we lost something. What we lost is accountability, responsibility, and morality. And as you can clearly see, when you don't have that mindset, when you don't live your modern life with modern gadgets, with modern possibilities and freedom and open borders, but when you are not grateful for the foundations, the principles that govern foundation of civilization, when you are not mindful about repercussions of your action in the world, that you are not mindful about your responsibility, that you are not mindful about what spirit guides you, metaphorically speaking, this is where it comes to. And it seems to me that we need to bring the conversation back, and this is why I supported the Peterson Academy, because I clearly see and I can align myself with Dr. Peterson in that effort to preserve the good things that we achieved as civilizations in terms of individual freedom, but at the same time to remind us what are the crucial foundations of our society that we need to preserve.
All right, Akira. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you would like to mention that we haven't discussed yet?
No, I think if you're content with everything what I said, then yeah, why not?
Beautiful. Thanks again for coming on. I already mentioned this before. It was a tough story to listen to. I bet it was also a tough story to tell in some way, even though you're happy to tell the truth. That's well, that's really admirable. But I want to thank you regardless. It's really much appreciated, and I hope it provides insight where insight is needed. So thank you.
I hope so. I hope that we can come to the place where we can look freely into the future and be mindful about that, and raise our spirit to rise up to the current challenges. I think it's time for us to stop hiding. It's time for us to stop being in a blissful cloud. It starts for us to understand that we live in this world. We are the part of it, and we are responsible for every single thing that happens here. And I hope that we can find remarkable meaning and joy in taking responsibility for what happens and for what manifests in our lives.
Thanks, Akira. All the best to you, and take care.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, Akira Asakhi has left the conversation. If you would like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, following, or liking, depending on the platform that you're listening on. I also would like to leave you with a quote by Herodotus that he wrote in his historical writings about the war between the Greeks and the Persians. No man is so foolish as to desire war more than peace, for in peace sons bury their fathers, but in war fathers bury their sons. Thank you for listening, and take care.